Very good. We'd like to welcome everyone out. The time is 5 p.m., so we have scheduled a workshop for a review from our Caldwell Executive, the Caldwell Executive Airport Strategic Plan. Appreciate our Director of Aviation here this evening and for all of his work and efforts and everything that he does, and to ensure that we are able to get factual and correct information out to the public. So I'd encourage them to reach out to the city, reach out to our director here if they have questions about the airport, things going on there, to make sure they're actually getting the correct information. So I do notice we have a member of our Airport Advisory Board in the audience, so thank you for being here, Randy. It's good to see. I don't have my glasses on, but I'm pretty sure that's Randy. If I put, yep, it is. So, okay, appreciate you being here. So with that, Scott, we'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor, councilors. I'm coming here today to present a overview of the strategic plan that we've been working on with out at the Caldwell Airport. This plan has involved myself, airport staff, the advisory board that we have in place, plus a lot of input from local residents that either fly or don't fly or either do or do not use the airport. We've kind of met them all through this process. So this presentation is just going to be a high-level overview. My plan on this is that once this is done, I will depart after this workshop, and then either at the next council meeting later in a month or the first one in September, I will come back with the full 30-page strategic plan as an agenda item for acceptance by the council at that point to say, yes, we approve you operating the airport and moving toward these identified goals. You know, go forth and do your job. And that's what I anticipate out of this coming to present to you today. All right, the strategic plan. So the update on this is we held 4 stakeholder meetings. Dates are listed right there. Once we come back at the next meeting for a more in-depth view of this plan, we'll go more into like where comments came from, who presented comments, and what all that looked like, whether it was public, pilots, hangar owners, business owners, or just other federal, state, city entities. So the issues. Long-standing issues since the 2 years I've been in this role has always been there's no control tower, there's a lot of traffic. We need to figure out how to do that so we can make the airport safer. We do not have what was formerly known as the airport cafe, no longer existed since when I came in, and what's happening with that. We have the construction, lots of it going on in the airport. I think right now there's probably around 14 or 15 hangars that are under construction being built. And then also perception. So what is this airport actually doing? Is it going to benefit those that have an airplane or those that go to flight school and use the airport? Or how are we going to leverage this economic tool that the city has to expound on the benefits of what the airport can do for the city while making that revenue generation coming back into the city coffers for further expansion down the road. So again, perceptions and reality. So a lot of this has come from perception being either a hobby airport, it's just a glorified golf course, it's not essential, there's a little or to none economic value that comes out of the airport. A lot of those are the perceptions. Like, unless you're on the airport regularly, or you fly, or you have a buddy you go out there and fly with, and if you're not out at the airport, it's just very difficult to understand the processes of what's happening, what's going on at the airport, and how is this helping me as just a general Caldwell citizen. What does that do for me is the big question. Everyone wants to know, what does it do for me? Reality, we are an FAA reliever airport. This has been hit on a few times. So this, again, does not mean that we're going to have commercial 737s coming to Caldwell Executive Airport. That is just not going to happen. Caldwell is not an emergency airport for Boise. Like, if a plane cannot land at Boise due to some emergency or malfunction, they are not going to come land at the Caldwell Airport. They're probably going to go down to Mountain Home, which has a much bigger runway that could handle that size of aircraft. Essential. So one of the interesting things on the airport, so I'm sure everybody knows and is aware, but the city in itself, we do not own any hangars on the airport. All the hangars and all the vertical construction is privately owned. Therefore, all those privately owned entities on the airport do pay property tax. And the amount that comes back into the city for fiscal year 23 and 24, that was just right around $250,000 annually that comes into the city from the property tax paid on the airport. The other half of the property tax goes to the county. The economic value. So we can go into this. We've all seen the 2020 economic impact report that ITD put out. They're only obligated to put that out once every 10 years, and so you could expect the next one of those to happen in 2030. So between those 10-year gaps when you don't have a report, it's left up to a lot of interpretation, a lot of work to go bang on hangar doors and see who's working where, what businesses are where, and everything else. But as a whole, right now, we employ just over 340 people are employed on the airport that are not city employees. They have a job at one of the hangars or one of the businesses or something on the airport. A lot of that, you get into direct and indirect spending. So that's people who work on the airport, run off to lunch, run into town, run over to D&B, fat guys, all the restaurants, craft lounge, all that stuff. Everybody's in the area due to the airport and they go eat. That becomes secondary spending that it contributes to the economic value of the airport. Next. All right, planning for the future. So this is a very quick overview of just some small comparisons of a city that's quite a bit larger than the Boise right now, and then an area in Reno where the population's quite a bit smaller. And we just kind of broke down population, gross domestic product, growth, and then reliever airports. So Salt Lake City and the Salt Lake City Valley and how they're set up, they have very large international airport. They have 2 reliever airports, and they all fall under one airport authority, because that then gives them the ability that everything that is produced or gained monetary-wise from the main commercial airport thus then supports the smaller reliever airports. For Boise, obviously this is Boise proper, so there's really no information that talks about Caldwell specifically that's easily attained on Google. But Boise right now, you're looking at 865,000 people in the greater Boise area, a GDP of $50 billion. Growth is very high. Reliever airports, we have Caldwell right now is the only one in the Treasure Valley that is listed or is, defined by the FAA as a reliever airport. And then you also have Reno, Nevada, 281,000 people, $36 billion in GDP. Growth, again, is moderate in that area, and they have 2 reliever airports within Reno, and you're looking at, right about just over 300,000 population difference between the Boise area and Reno. And the big one on this one I always look at is the GDP differences between Salt Lake, the Boise area, and then Reno itself, which actually Reno has a very high GDP per population as compared to over here in Idaho. And then in Salt Lake City's GDP is just outrageous for the amount of people they have. So Caldwell Executive Airport. This is a small map. Pilots notice this is off a VFR sectional, and this kind of dictates our location in comparison to Boise and in the other airports in the area, the big ones being Ontario, Weiser, Nampa, and then to the south of this picture you would have Mountain Home. But what this is showing is how centralized Caldwell Executive Airport is to everything else that's going on in this area of the Treasure Valley. Just centrally located, ease of use for everybody, and then you're also cutting down your commute times to Caldwell are pretty much going to be the same from everywhere in this picture. And again, goes into the reliever as a reliever airport. So our obligation to Boise, defined by the Federal Aviation Administration, is that when Boise runs out of room for general aviation or corporate traffic, it is Caldwell's responsibility to kind of pick up that, invite those entities in and give them a spot to be, or else they're just going to leave the valley. Because right now Boise's going through huge expansions and lots of changes going on over there. Space is paramount. People are trying to find it, hunting for it, arguing for it all the time. It's just, it's a space issue, or just an economic issue on that supply and demand. Right now, the supply of space on an airport is extremely low, and the demand is very high. All right, again, so 341 full-time jobs on Caldwell Executive Airport. The 2020 study put out $56 million in economic output. This goes into that direct and indirect spending I was talking about. And then we also house Silverhawk Aviation, which is the largest flight school in Idaho, predominantly small fixed-wing planes and helicopters training there. And then you also have greater than $15 million taxed employment earnings as far as from the employees that work on the airport themselves. That's how much income, you could say, was taxed within 2020 off that economic assessment value. And then, so again, closing this out, next plan, next steps. Thankfully, on the board right now, we have Mr. John Caldwell, who is a former businessman and very familiar with strategic planning, was able to help us facilitate this with in-house and do it for free. But going back to like issues, goals, obstacles, and action steps. So as I come to the next council meeting, when we present the entire strategic plan in its entirety for acceptance, we can go through some of these and how the issues were obtained, identified, the goals we thought would work against those issues, what obstacles are going to be there, and then what we have put in place on really our top 3 goals for fiscal year 2026 and 27 and 28, and what that's going to look like and how that'll play out. So cost recap. So right now we have a couple things. One, well, actually there's another one in there I'll add in. So we have the control tower. And then also now we do have the electrical issues on the airport existing within the 200 series hangars that I'm sure everyone is familiar with at this point. Defined in communications plan that can be done in-house on how we're going to communicate that out via newspaper, interviews, social media, and that nature, just to get the information out there so people understand what we're doing on the airport and what it's going to look like moving forward and what our end state is expected to be as we bring more and more build out to the Caldwell Executive Airport. So looking at this, essentially the bottom target right there over 3-year request would be ideally, if everything was a perfect world, I'm going to be asking for $2.5 million from the city. And that would be to influx into the airport on a one-time cost, which would completely build out the north side of the airport and then get the airport really where it needs to be to get out of that, fine line black red area and then actually be up super into black and start investing back into the airport itself. For FY26 on infrastructure, see obviously during the budget meetings we talked, I would love to get $845,000 from the city. However, I know, and then council members, it's just not going to be available. Plus the other issues creeping up with the electric we talked about and some other areas that need improvements. There's going to be smaller amounts of money that are going to have to be allocated elsewhere just to keep the flying public, up to where they need to be so that they can house their airplanes in a safe manner on that. All right, and then this is a snippet from the 2020 impact study that was done by ITD with the state, and it just kind of shows kind of a flux. Back in 2008, we had 535 based aircraft. 2017, it went down to 457. What you also have in there are 2008, 9, and 10, which were very economic trying years within the country. And I'm sure that some people that owned airplanes at that point or were thinking about buying an airplane or had it, probably sold, went somewhere else, figuring it out there. So we are not going to get another diagram that looks like this from the state again until at a minimum 2029, 2030, when they do their next economic impact study. But this is just the picture of what I have to work with of where we're at in 2020. And then, like I said before, it's kind of from interpretation, drawing in as much economic data as possible to really project out where we're going to be, come 2030, 2040, 2050. All right, and that is my presentation. And then the full plan in its entirety will be ready to be spoken about at a later date.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Councilor Denver.
Scott, thank you very much for the presentation. I appreciate it. I have a couple questions here that hopefully you can be able to impart some of your wisdom on us.
Yes.
So you talked about all the hangars being privately owned out there. And so the hangar owners pay rent to the city in addition to whatever taxes they pay on their. Are there any hangar standards? Do we have some hangars that you go, oh, well, if you were building that today, we wouldn't let you build that? So what's the gradient level of hangar condition out there?
I would say the gradient level of hangar condition would go anywhere, let's see, on a scale of 1 to 10, would go anywhere from a low 3 to a 10, depending on the year it was built, how much, how much was invested by the owner when they built it, what they were looking for, what they wanted out of the hangar. There are a lot of hangars out there that could use some love. However, at the end of the day, again, they all are private property. And so then I look at it as a comparison of, if you walk into a neighborhood and people have issues with their homes and stuff and you want to help it, yeah, you could mandate that everybody cleans it up and whatnot, but then again, it's on that homeowner to make sure it happens. And then, moving forward, I absolutely plan on having a hangar development standard packet. Plan on getting together with, quite a few of the local builders that do hangars out here. Cav and Tabor, Randy Neary, R&M Steel is a huge involvement on the airport, and really kind of put a packet together that's a one-stop. So somebody wants to build a hangar, I could hand them a packet. They look at it, fill it out, bring it back to me, and then we're done. All the information's collected, and they can start moving forward through permitting process in that way. But then really control on the spacing and maximizing the amount of space we do have left to get as much in there as possible that makes sense and still keeps the airport safe.
I got a couple more.
Yeah,
Okay.
yep, go ahead.
So you talked about 300-plus employees, I think 341 employees out there. What type of employment is out there?
There's a little bit of everything. So there's only one business on the airport that is non-aeronautical. That's been in place for a few years now. Everybody else is an aeronautical business. So you have the flight schools, mechanics, just overhauls, things of that nature, painting, cleaning, all the little knickknacks you may need to fix randomly, like, random fittings that break in your house or in your car. Same thing happens on an airplane. So you have to go to a shop, like aero builders on the airport, and you're like, oh, I need this piece. And you go put it in. Or you go full blown and you just get, bigger. And there's a guy out there, you could probably walk in and have him design and build you a plane. So you get the full spectrum. Plus there's a small pilot shop out there that only sells the knee boards that you would strap to your leg when flying, the headphones you use to hook into the radio and talk. We do have one of those shops on the airport as well.
Okay, great. So you mentioned electrical issues, and I think I heard something about electrical issues a couple months ago. And so if I understand correctly, and I'm just guessing, if you have hangars that are in condition 3 or a low 3 and hangars in condition 10, I would suspect that the electrical issues in 3 are the ones you have concern about, where the electrical issues in 10 you don't. Is that a correct assumption?
Correct.
And so what do we do about those that are in a condition 3? Do we just not care, or do the hangar owners not care, or how does that?
Oh, no, I care. It's a very flexible space to have a conversation about on how that would go about getting corrected, because there's multiple different avenues that somebody could go to correct those. As far as, you could put out a mandate that says, hey, 3 years from now, everybody has to have their hangar up to code, as far as fire code, electrical code, all that stuff that's required normally. But also at the same time, as I would call it like the host individual, I'm the face of the airport out there, and I feel there's also a small amount of obligation from me to ensure that the pilots and the hangar owners out there have a certain standard of living, I guess you would say, for their airplanes out there in the most protected environment that they can have. And so that's going to become a interesting conversation between the municipality of the city of Caldwell and a private individual owner on how we're going to tackle that project. And there's multiple meetings and conversations left to be had on that and what that's going to look like.
And then the last question I have is with regards to infrastructure. I think, when I think of infrastructure, not only do I think of, the runway itself, but I also think about drinking water and sewer and all that other stuff. And then I heard a conversation that you had right here a couple of months ago with regards to putting a restroom in that area or a bathroom or a public facility. Do we have the infrastructure we need out there, water, wastewater wise, to expand the airport as you need to expand it?
As of right now, no, we do not. So, but we are working on a couple different plans on how we're going to get that in place and do it the best way possible, not only economically, but, what makes sense for the city and what makes sense for the number of users we have and what that's going to look like. I probably field 2 to 3 calls a week about people looking for space to come build a hangar. There's 82 acres the city has on the north side of the airport that's open, that could be built on. However, there is no infrastructure for them to hook up to out in those areas. And like, you could go build a hangar, you're just not gonna have any water or electric or gas or any of that until it makes it out to you. Sir.
Councilor Stoddard?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Scott, on your 30-page report, first coming from the corporate world, I hope there's going to be a 3 or 5-page summary at the end, so
Correct.
we can just read that, and then if we have details, we can go back.
That's what I talked about today. It's kind of the summary, Councilor Stoddard.
Okay. Issues, when you had on your first page there, one of the major questions I get asked besides when the control tower is going to go in, when are you going to close down Linden? I think that's a major issue of all the taxpayers, especially in that area, and I didn't see that on the issues. You have any idea? When
That was actually very low on the list for airport users.
Really, and that was from what, the airport users, or?
From the strategic planning process and those meetings we went through on the information collection, I think that was probably written down only once or twice.
Really?
I can go back and look at all the historicals because I have them rolled up in my office and get you a actual answer on that. But from as level of importance, it was not scored as high as a lot of the other
Really?
issues.
All the emails I get and phone calls, that besides the tower was the second one,
So,
whatever. As far as a reliever airport, when you talk about reliever airports, and we talked about this in our council room just a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
Everybody automatically thinks it's, if a 737 can't land in Boise, they come to Caldwell.
yes,
So,
that is not true.
yeah, so reliever, do we need to change the terminology there, or what do you think? I don't know.
Oh, no.
I'm just asking. That's
So
all.
I know Dean Dishman got the FAA designation of reliever airport put on, I believe, in 1978 when the airport opened, as far as the how he went through and did that process with everything. And it's been there since. There, as a reliever airport for a larger airport, obviously Boise is the largest one here, largest one in the state. The only obligation we have under that federal definition is that we are expected and obligated to absorb as much general aviation and corporate traffic away from Boise for Boise's benefit and our benefit, as far as what that would look like. There's nothing in the context of being a reliever airport where you're expected to take in commercial air traffic that can't land at the, I'll call it the mothership airport.
Okay, I just wonder if the terminology could be changed. If it's a federal issue, it probably can't, I don't imagine.
Yeah.
What would be the largest executive planes that you would think would be coming in there? Hawker 800s, 900s?
I think something probably more along the lines of like a Citation 10.
Okay,
So I believe that's right around like 70-foot wingspan. I'd have to look it up exactly to see what the dimensions are. Potentially Hawker level traffic, but even at that level, I would say you'd get an intermix of, citations. I would be surprised if even a Learjet ever tried to come to Caldwell, just One, based on maintenance availability, because on Caldwell, there's none at this point for those high-level jets.
Nothing to do with runway length then, as far as you're concerned?
Right now, so pretty much most planes, even private corporate jet planes, could land if they needed to on the airport. The problem becomes taking off, especially when it's hot out and you have a lot of gas. So unless one of those entities really, they could come to the airport, but every time they take off, they're going to go land in Seattle or Boise and fuel right up again and then keep going. And it really just doesn't make any sense efficiency-wise for that company at this point.
Because what I see in the near future is with Boise adding more flights, I understood today they added more
Yes.
flights to California. We're going to get more pressure for
Yes.
executive planes to land closer to Boise, and that'll be Caldwell because nobody else can take them. So, you know,
Yeah, the dynamic will become interesting and how we're able to tackle that, but we just need to do that through conversation and an appropriate planning on what's going to benefit, Caldwell the most, along with, the secondary benefits being to the Treasure Valley, helping the Boise Airport out in that nature, but then also getting more traffic out in this way and back and forth. Nothing that, it can't be decided overnight or in a vacuum for that matter.
no, I understood. But with that kind of pressure move, the closing of Linden up 5 years or 10 years, I don't know what kind of number you have for closing Linden.
I think how I've looked at stuff, so I know the oldest master plan for the airport I've looked at was from, I believe, 2010. And it had the Linden closure in that master plan, which carried over to the 2020 master plan as well. And then when I say Linden closure also, this is only talking about Linden between Smead and Aviation Way.
Right.
Like, that is the only section of Linden that would ever be closed. And how that would look, a couple different options, I think, on that. One, we can sit around and grow the airport and let some of the larger corporate planes come in and then be mandated to close Linden by the FAA due to safety concerns. Or we can kind of front load the problem, look where we are, look at when we expect to receive these larger aircraft, and then as a city kind of take control on when we want to do that, and then have, then the city has to say on what that's going to look like, if it's going to happen, if Aviation Way becomes a three-way intersection, and then we close Linden at Smead, really, what are we doing? Because again, I don't have information on traffic counts that go on in that area. There'd be a new study done on that just to see, so that we get an idea of how much traffic could potentially be diverted if we do close Linden and what that would even look like. Is it feasible to just have everyone to go to 2026 and then back around? Or does something else need to happen with interior artery road off of the Smead area up and around and then back over to aviation? I have no idea.
With the widening to 2026, I think it'd probably be a lot easier now than it would have been a couple of years ago, so.
Yes.
And I'd rather have us do it than get the feds involved.
That's
Initiate it rather than
Yeah.
wait for them.
Yeah, usually the timeline on a federal mandate isn't long.
Yeah. So if you had a wild guess, closing Linden would be within, 10 years, 20 years? What would you say?
I would say at the earliest, probably very preliminary discussion on it would be in 5 years from now.
Okay. And then as far as the tower is concerned, when do you think, and I'm not going to hold you to it, but just.
No, absolutely. So the tower's a whole nother beast, and I want to say up front, so getting a control tower has nothing to do with runway extension or closing Linden or any of that. So the control towers, you just come in and ensure that the airspace is monitored and maintained in the safest manner it can be. But right now, the city, we are currently in the process. We are waiting for the next notice of funding to come out under the Infrastructure and Jobs Act for FY26. It should be coming out this month. They haven't released it yet. Once that's released, I already have JUB Engineering kind of pre-filling out the application packet. And so once that opens, we're just going to send it right in. There is a potential that it could get picked up and approved for construction in 2026. What I expect to happen is probably it gets carried forward another year, and then we'd be looking at construction in 2027, as long as the money that the federal government obligated back in 2022 against this program still exists today. which is just kind of an unknown at this point until they release the funding notification.
Still keyed around the federal money though, right?
Still keyed around the federal money.
Okay.
At a minimum, the federal government right now would pay 90% of the cost of a control tower.
Okay. Last item. When I was still on board, we still had a problem with standardizing leases, and how are we doing with that?
We're getting there. I do have a lengthy lease draft that's, I've been told by some people on the board might be excessively long. I think sometimes, excessive information within legal contracts is appropriate. Sometimes it's not. It's gone through one review with legal. I have not had it reviewed by
Oscar?
Klaus yet, but we're going to get there. It's just kind of like where it falls in and get that. But I expect before the end of fiscal year 26, I have a new standardized leasing packet that will kind of keep everybody back on the same page.
Was the board included in the initial,
Yes.
okay, terminology? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Olguth.
Yeah, Scott, thank you. Could you just briefly touch on the benefit to Caldwell having that reliever designation?
Yes. So it kind of becomes difficult. So I would put it this way. I view having that reliever designation because all it is just a designation from the federal government saying you will relieve this other airport. As far as the benefit of having that reliever designation for the city itself, there really is not one. It does not grant you any extra funding from the federal government. It doesn't grant you any extra funding from the state, from the aeronautical departments. It is just that designation that states that you should, to your greatest competency possible, take in the general aviation traffic as needed from the larger commercial airport so they have more space for commercial traffic.
And that's what you hit exactly what I was asking.
Yeah.
I was wondering if it helped us with grants and things like that. But
It does not.
It does not
No.
add to our application. Okay,
No.
and then the electrical issues in the 200 hangars, that's been a problem for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
Have you ever, and maybe you have an answer for this, don't need to go into it in detail,
Okay.
but do we have a legal opinion of what our responsibility is? Should the worst happen and there be some issue out there, or what, has legal ever looked at that and said, this is where we need to be on that issue?
Yeah, I don't want to speak for Oscar, but just a preliminary answer on that. I would say that the current contracts and how they're written out, a lot of those areas to where you would look for those answers can be vague. And kind of, when things are vague, it's never going to help the person that initiated a contract. It's going to help the customer. But do you have any comment on that? Yeah, I would just.
Well, and what
Yeah.
I'm saying is, there's a difference between getting electricity to the site, and then everything above the ground we don't own.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
so there is a point where, after this point, it's not our responsibility, if I'm understanding the situation right.
Correct. Yeah, the last conversation I had with Idaho Power and our electrical department, we're looking at the potential, and again, this is a potential solve to the problem, is to bring in the infrastructure and equipment that is needed to have it set up to where all a hangar owner would have to do is then tie into a meter that's set at the end of their hangar. Essentially, the city would front the cost for bringing the power from the road into the airport and to the meter banks on the end of each rows. Again, this has all just been table talk so
Right.
far on a potential. From what I have read out of all the lease agreements out there, how it's written, you could say the city has no responsibility to bring any power anywhere. It's all up to the hangar owner. But then from my standpoint, it's also, what's the right thing to do as far as to ease the burden of what it could cost a potential large group of people to break that down and do what's right and just, try to help them along.
So when you're preparing your budget, Is that kind of what you're looking at, is getting power to those lanes?
Yes.
The cost that you're presenting in your budgets is getting power to each of those lanes?
Yes.
So that hangar owners can tap in as they're able to?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Yeah, and that was discussed, and on the high end of that, I would say it was reiterated very high end. You'd be looking at $80,000, but that would bring all your infrastructure, everything underground, into those hangar sections right there, and it would be set, and then it would be the responsibility of the hangar owner to then come in, get the permit, hook up to the meter, and then bring power back to their hangar.
Well, that seems like a pretty reasonable price to me. But yeah,
It's kind of what I thought when I saw the price the first time, because I thought it was going to have more zeros on it.
yeah, me too, me too. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yes.
Counselor Doty?
Thank you. Just a little bit more on the electrical. Was that in this year's budget or your prediction, what you talked about earlier in your presentation?
That was not in this year's budget ask. This occurred, I think, the week after we had our final budget meeting.
Okay.
However, from other areas of kind of wants or needs, I think would help the airport in that budget ask. I can negate on doing certain things this next year and then put funds toward correcting a more immediate issue and then catch back up on other things later on.
Well, I think right now, just you've mentioned it yourself, we're only at table talks and you've given
Yeah.
us one option. So I think there's a lot more discussion to be had before we decide
Yeah,
what or if or what we're obligated to. So
yes.
I don't know changing the budget right now because we don't even know what our options are.
Yeah,
So I'm just glad to hear there's more conversation coming on that.
Always more.
Thank you.
Counselor Register?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. First of all, I know how hard you all have worked on this, and Counselor Stoddick had a lot of the same questions that I did, so we don't have to go through all of them. But a couple of questions. Something came up today on social media that you and I had both noticed about this question about whether or not the expansion had anything to do with the fact that there's not an on-ramp or off-ramp at U-Stick. And so is there any correlation between what's going on U-Stick and what's going on with the airport?
No correlation at all
So
that I am aware of.
do we have any idea where that might have came from or started? Because it's,
I have no idea. The first time I was ever made aware of it was this morning, and it was new to me, and I think that would be an interesting project, but from what I've, discovered the 2 years here is that there's never been a plan to extend the runway across U-Stick. It's always been across Linden in that one section.
I don't know that the question was whether or not the runway would extend to U-Stick, but rather that some sort of,
The effects.
yeah, that there was something, maybe whatever the construction that was happening with this lengthening of the runway was somehow going to affect what was happening over at U-Stick. So whether there was like tunneling or something like that. So maybe the mayor can, maybe you know why we're not getting an on-ramp, off-ramp at U-Stick that would clear it up.
So, yeah, it has nothing to do with the airport tunneling. There would be hundreds of millions of dollars out there. So there is discussion with ITD, as you're aware, looking at an off-ramp, on-ramp potential at U-Stick. That's still being looked at. It's ultimately up to the federal government on how the location of that. They're looking at different options and still yet to be determined. But that has, nothing to do with the runway extension. And U-Stick is the only roadway in the valley that runs across the entire valley without stopping. It goes from Homedale Road all the way to Boise. And so it makes no sense to end U-Stick Road, put a barrier up, because it literally is the only, couldn't even say that about the freeway, to be honest. And so that is a road that's well protected on that, so completely separate issues. And there's a lot of things that get started on social media on that, and we just always ask people to reach out to the correct sources and find out the information for yourself, and we can provide you with the factual information.
Thanks. So I don't think that anybody thinks U-Stick is being shut down. I think it sounded like somehow the construction that was happening on Linden was going to make it so that we couldn't do whatever at U-Stick, even if it was approved. So as long as that's not the case, then that's the
I
answer.
am not aware of it, and
Okay.
it would definitely not have the answer on that if that was a thing. I would
Right.
talk to ITD and ask them what that
Okay.
would look like.
I just
if-
want to make sure we're
yeah.
not doing something that's going to hurt us in the
Yeah.
future,
No,
as
I
far
would-
as that's
if
concerned.
If that was going to be the case, then we would need to come up with some, significantly more planning and do another master plan and figure out how we're going to, expand operations with the limited space that we have. But I do not foresee anything that could involve the airport that would hinder a federal highway project on 84.
Okay, thank you. So, I mean, I still have reservations about Linden being shut down. It concerns me, especially with the hotel project going in and the extra traffic and shutting down one of the streets that leaves northbound from the city makes me pretty nervous, especially with all the construction that's going on. And right now, all the construction that's going on at the same time. So if we did that
Yes.
again and we shut down, U-Stick to do construction and Linden was shut down and whatever, nobody can get out of here. So
No,
I guess that's
yeah.
planning.
I'd say, even as a counselor or any one of you as counselors or a citizen in Caldwell, if people woke up tomorrow and you couldn't get on Linden between Smead and Aviation Way, that would be, horrendous on what that would look like and the reaction that would come to everyone in here. I think, long-term, is that the best suitable solution so far that I've seen? Yes. However, is there a plan to actually execute the runway extension and just say, have fun on 2026? Not that I'm aware of. This is going to be another one of those, much like the power issue on the airport right now, like multiple talks, lengthy conversations with multiple entities on what that would look like, when things start or when things get blocked off, where people are going. There's a lot more of community involvement, I believe, that would need to happen before we even got to the point where we said like, yep, this is happening this year.
Right, because I do think there's some misconception that this is going to happen, that this is like an approval process and then it's going to start building next week. Like, that's not the case. And it seems that these discussions have been going on for quite a while, like years, like decades.
Yes.
And so I think it might help if the public's reassured that there will still be a lot of conversation about that. And with that, you talked about the scoring and what was important and what wasn't and that kind of thing. And I just wanted to be clear, was that airport users or was that community as a whole? And I'll just finish this real
Yeah.
quick, but if it was not the community, we can see on the map that we have neighborhoods all around in there on the north side of Linden especially that could be obviously, well, they're going to be more affected if we expand and have a longer runway with more airplanes, whatever it is, noise, traffic, convenience, whatever goes on
Yes.
over there. And so I would really encourage neighborhood meetings and having some kind of town hall where the public can speak and express those concerns and be part of those conversations. And it's not just included to airport users or council or city staff.
Yeah, no, the counselor on that, the workshops that we did were open to all citizens of Caldwell. And we had all citizens. We had multiple people that were not pilots, not business owners, just residential, homeowner that lived in the neighborhood just to the north of the airport. Obviously they're going to be concerned because they live right there and they hear it, they see it all day, every day. Moving forward, I think, the best way to get that information out there probably would be town halls. And I love talking to people and I will talk to anybody and everybody because you can ask me anything. I'll answer it if I know the answer. If I don't know the answer, I'll find it for you. But it's, everybody was included on this. And when this plan comes back in 2 weeks or a month, there will be a sheet within that plan that will show kind of everything that was voted upon and how that was scored and where that ranked and how we essentially racked and stacked those into the level of importance based on that feedback.
Well, and I think sometimes people don't really know if they're not paying attention to social media all the time or looking at websites. It's something sometimes where people are just genuinely not aware of that there was a neighborhood meeting or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And then it starts to gain traction on social media, and then people are like, oh, now we're really paying attention to when these things are coming up. So I just hope that we have more of that as time goes on.
Yes, no, absolutely. Nothing good ever gets planned in a vacuum. So we need as much input as possible from everybody that, as a citizen of the town, the state, the county, however you want to look at it, but as much feedback from everybody should be weighed in on decision making, and because ultimately you're going to be affecting people's lives in some way or another, and we need to understand as the leadership of the city what that's going to look like, and if we need to do anything or obligated to do anything to mitigate that effect if it's negative, or enhance that effect if it's positive.
Perfect. Okay, that's all that I see. So thank you so much. We appreciate that presentation for this workshop. So that'll conclude this workshop at this time. Again, no decisions are ever made in a workshop, just discussion, information. So we'll end this at this time, and you get a little time between now and 6 o'clock. So we'll see everybody back here at 6 p.m. for our regularly scheduled city council meeting.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Mayor.
you, Scott.